Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And we are recording. Charlie Larson, welcome to Weird Web Radio. It's awesome to have you here, man.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And now that I say man out loud, I realize I don't even know if you go by any specific pronouns. Do you?
Oh, he, him. That's fine.
Okay, cool. All right, man. No, dude. Man, dude. For those of you who don't know who Charlie is, you were brought to my attention by your publisher, which I greatly appreciated. And Jason Miller at the same time. Jason having been on the show before many a time. Yeah. Jason being a great guy. Yeah. Jason wrote the foreword for the book. I was going to say intro, but it was the foreword.
Yeah, he wrote the foreword.
Yeah, which I thought was very cool. I mean, congratulations to you to get Jason to do that for you. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
The cover is
appreciative
badass.
Of it.
Yeah, they say the people over at Red Wheel and Weiser, they did a badass job on the cover too.
Yeah, that blew me out of the park. I was not expecting something of that level.
Right. And in case you guys don't know, we're talking about Charlie's book, Anubis, Ancient Egypt's Lord of Death and Protection. I read it. I love it. I do recommend it. You've done good work here, Charlie.
Thank you.
So Charlie's bio for everybody, so you know who we're talking to, is Charlie Larson has been a practicing witch and eclectic pagan for over 2 decades. Charlie is passionate about nature, ancestral magic, energy healing, and shadow work. He's a priest of Anubis and works closely with Hecate and other deities. A leader in his coven since the 2000s, he has written and taught in various online communities since 2016. He currently resides in California. You can connect with him at... And it's in italics. What is that website, sir?
Oh, AnubisLightandShadow.com.
That's what he said. All right. Awesome. And before we get started into the questions, I wanted to read from page 25 of your book, Gratitude Prayer to Anubis, because I kind of dig it, and I thought it would be a nice way to launch this episode. So, Hail Anubis, Lord of Death, Sovereign of the Underworld, Protector and Guardian, Guide and Healer, Shaman and Wise Elder, He who walks between worlds. We offer our thanks for your wisdom and guidance, for your presence and your protection, for teaching us the mysteries. May we walk between worlds as you do, seeing the magic and mystery in the world, and honoring the deceased and those who have come before. Dua Anpu. I really like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, I like that a lot. All right. So, first question around here. We did mention deceased in that, didn't we? Since you've never been on the show before, Charlie, have you ever experienced a haunting or anything that would be called like paranormal phenomena?
Yes. In the house I grew up in, I didn't grow up in California. Actually, I'm a transplant from the Midwest of the U.S. And the house I lived in was built in the late 1800s or early 1900s. So it was a pretty old house. And there was, I'm pretty sure there was a spirit that lived in our house. There was an old man and I think a little girl. It's a little odd. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather, who I've mentioned in the book a couple of times, especially in the introduction. But my grandfather was also very attuned to the spirit world, and he would often see the little girl, whereas I would often see the man, and he was always dressed in this odd, like a robe almost, and had long hair. And never bothersome, never were they bothersome, and it wasn't all the time that I saw them, but it would be from time to time. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and he was just like sitting in the corner of my room, and it was never, weirdly enough, nothing I was ever afraid of. It was quite comforting, actually. So I don't know, now that I'm talking about this now, it's not really something I have not really thought about this for a long time. So thinking about it now, I wonder if it was some sort of guide of some kind.
be worth exploring. You know,
Yeah.
could be something lost there. Maybe it's worth remembering now.
You know, there, my, let me see here for a second. My great grandfather died in that house, I think. So I don't know if it was
Was
him sticking around or what.
was your great grandfather prone to wearing robes? Did he have long hair?
Not that I know of. In fact, I think by the time he died, he was bald, but so that probably wasn't him. But
Oh no, I feel the man's pain.
oh, I'm starting to get there.
um, when you say you saw them, do you mean like as easily as you see me right now, or
Uh,
is it something more you saw them in your mind's eye?
yeah, that's pretty much it. Saw it in my mind's eye. Also, I'm a very sensory person. I can, whatever term you might want to give that, but I can often sense when there's a spirit around. So I
Okay.
definitely do not mean as I can see you or my computer screen
Yeah.
here. So
Okay. So when you say you sense sensory person, uh, how would you describe that to somebody? Because I promise you, there's someone listening right now who's not sure about what it is they're experiencing, and they're probably doing it the way you do it, and
yeah.
you're about to give them that nod of approval. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. How do you really explain that? It's not something like someone touching your arm or my arm touching or my skin touching the shirt that I'm wearing or something like that. Um, it can vary depending on what it is. It could feel kind of like a warmth, or it could feel cold. You could perhaps feel your skin kind of tingling or crawling, or almost feel like someone's breathing on the back of your neck, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, Different kind of odd sensations that you maybe physically can't explain. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
But you're definitely feeling it with your body, not a internal kind of anxiety or feeling like that,
right?
or a nervousness, or you know what I mean, just like that,
There's
or excitement, but it's physical.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly right.
Like a warm touch or a cold touch, or just the feeling of temperature changes and so on. Yeah, that's cool. Like
Exactly.
all of that. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to experience these things, and that's why I like to drill down and figure out exactly how it is. You've probably never had to tell anyone that
Yeah.
specifically before.
Right. Well, not often, no.
Welcome to Paranormal Therapy 101. No.
Exactly.
Show us on the doll where the spirit touched you. All right.
Uh,
So you have done something I've never seen before, and maybe it exists somewhere, but you wrote a book completely highlighting Anubis, or I believe I have always called Anubis Anpu.
yeah.
And I encountered so funny. I encountered the Egyptian deities as they were around the time I was like 16, 17. And I know it was around that time because it was 17 years old when I got the books that really shaped what I was going to do in the
Right.
occult. But we were toying around with anything we could get our hands on, and we were convinced as Midwest teenagers that, hey, if it's really old, that's probably the most powerful. Fell in love with Isis, and I have maintained an altar and everything to Isis and a relationship with her
Yeah.
amongst all the other things I do since that day. Like, so it's been many years, and Anpu as well. But anyway, that's when I encountered them. Why did you encounter Anubis Anpu?
Good question. A similar thing when I was a teenager. Well, there's, I guess, a kind of a side story of how I got onto this path, but it just ended up being while sort of, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest also, and there was not a lot of access to information or books. It was, the early days of the internet, and so there wasn't a ton of resources, and obviously, the local library is not going to carry any occult or pagan or witch books or anything like that. But in what resources that I had found, I think that the thing that stood out to me the most was just this feeling or a sense when I would see the name Anubis on the page. It would just kind of jump out at me, and that's kind of how it started to me. Um, I didn't have this, I wish I had this grand story about how I was having a dream and he waltzed in the room and said, "Hello, I'm Anubis." But
Right.
unfortunately, it wasn't quite that interesting, at least not at first. So it was more of just a curiosity or a kind of a draw towards the name or towards the, I suppose it's the energy behind the name, maybe, or the whatever you might call it. Um, yeah, and so I started exploring what I could, and of course, again, I didn't have access to a ton of resources, and there wasn't a lot of books out there, at least not from sort of a spiritual perspective on Anubis. So I kind of started digging into history and things like that, and trying to piece
Hmm.
together what I could and figure out what I could from that. So
I
it,
like
it
it.
yeah, it took a lot of sort of reading between the lines, I think.
Yeah. And I think we've made some presumptions here. I know I have as the host that people know what we're talking about exactly. So who is Anubis
Great question.
historically, and how that relationship develops over time?
Yeah. So Anubis is probably one of the most recognizable deities in ancient Egypt. Even if people don't know his name or anything about him, I think they could probably recognize him. Uh, Looking at sort of anything that's, you watch a documentary on Egypt or read a book or something, you'll see hieroglyphs and figures of the different gods and goddesses portrayed often with the body parts, often the head of a different animal. And so Anubis is often portrayed as having the head of a jackal. I like to say candid because, there's arguments whether it's a jackal or another dog-like creature. But
Hmm.
anyway, Anubis began as sort of the um, Lord of the Dead, and over time, uh, and something I want to always remind people is that what we call ancient Egypt spans thousands of years. And
Yeah.
if you think about what's happened in the last 10 years and just how much things have changed, multiply that by hundreds, thousands, whatever. So over the span of thousands of years, a lot changed. And so
Hmm.
when you look into ancient Egypt and information, sometimes you find contradictory information. I say that because um, later on, other deities sort of rose to popularity. Osiris, for example, became seen as the Lord of the Dead, and there's sort of a myth behind that, where Osiris was murdered by his brother and chopped up into a bunch of little tiny pieces and scattered all over Egypt. And Osiris's wife, the goddess Isis, sought the help of Anubis as her guardian and protector, sort of one of his roles that he's still commonly known for, to find the pieces and put him back together. And so, in this process, in order to bring him back to life, once they had all of his pieces of his body, Anubis, and he's sort of given credit as inventing embalming and mummification. So he embalmed and mummified, or mummified then embalmed, um, Osiris's body so that he could be brought back to life. So I say all of this because afterwards, later in time, his role in people's minds at least sort of shifted into, it almost sounds like he got demoted from being Lord of Death to sort of the guy who preserves bodies, but um, he had a bigger role than that even. He has this role as a guide into the afterlife. So in ancient Egypt, once you die, your soul went on a journey, um, and a series of sort of trials and tests. And at the end of this, was a weighing of the heart ceremony, is what they called it, and this is where your heart, which represented your soul, was weighed against the feather of Maat, and Maat was both a concept and a goddess of truth, order, and justice. And they had a list of these 42 statements that basically, I mean, you could sort of very loosely look at it, sort of like the Ten Commandments. It's a list of things that I didn't do this, I didn't steal, I didn't kill, cheat, lie, whatever, all of these things. And Anubis was the person who presided over this ceremony. He was not the one who made the final judgment, but he was the one who presided over the swaying of the heart ceremony. And so Anubis has had a lot of roles, kind of looking generally as guide. People see him as the guide in both life and death, sort of a protector. And as maybe I can get into this a little more in a minute, but as time went on and Egypt's history changed greatly, he was invoked for a lot of different practices, magical practices, divination, spell work. This was later in Egyptian history, when the Greeks and the Romans sort of invaded and took over.
Yeah, it's getting near like what was called late antiquity, that
Yeah.
of that period.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ancient Egypt's history is very complicated. You had so many different nations that sort of invaded and took over, and sometimes practices and beliefs were sort of forced on the Egyptians, and so that can be another reason that things changed. Sometimes the Egyptian practices had an influence on the other cultures as well. When the Greeks came in, they saw Anubis as being similar to Hermes. And at first glance, that may sound a little odd, because Hermes is often seen as sort of a trickster, at least to some. And but looking at a different role as psychopomp, someone who guides souls into the afterlife, I think that's probably where they came up with that. And so they blended the two of them into a deity known as Hermanubis. And Hermanubis and Anubis sort of continued on even after the fall of ancient Egypt, the last pharaoh. And Anubis was invoked in various magical practices alongside deities like Hecate, who is if anyone doesn't know, a very powerful goddess in ancient, well, I say ancient Greek, but also kind of other parts of that world.
Listeners of this show are well versed in.
I figured. Yeah, but they were invoked together in spell work, and Anubis in ancient Rome had sort of this cult following of necromancers who, I mean, eventually were outlawed and was disbanded. But he never really went away, but his role over time really shifted. And so one thing that I've come to realize is that while he is not someone who I would say holds dominion over things such as, magic and spell work, he is sort of the gatekeeper, or I don't want to say gatekeeper as in prevents you from doing something, but gatekeeper as in the person who shows you the door, the gateway to kind of the deeper mysteries and knowledge of the world.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And then that very much so relates to Hecate to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, one of her, I didn't actually know this until I was doing research for the book, but it really resonated with me. One of Hecate's epithets is Kleidukos, which is key bearer, and I discovered that that's actually one that they used with Anubis as well.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that.
Very, very interesting to me.
Do you think, like, because the uh, approach to Anubis, the worship of Anubis, the way people called on him over time changed so much. Um, and then, of course, you get the syncretic god who lasted, I mean, a few centuries, I think, at least, in Hermanubis. Um, do you think the way Anubis, in particular, is being worked with today, and maybe even further developed after people get, influenced by your work, do you think this will become another bigger chapter over time in the worship of Anubis? Will you all be creating some sort of newer approach and practice that will solidify into something that passes on in generations? Do you think that's going to happen?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I never really thought of myself as having a part in that or a role in that in any way, even if it's
Too
a
late.
very
You wrote a
small
book.
one. I will say though that um, having read, I don't know. There's power in books, and I never really thought about this until I wrote one. But there's really power in what you read, and it can really shape your own thoughts and practice. And growing up and reading the few books that I had access to, really sort of, at least in the early days, had a big influence on me, um,
Mhm.
and shaping my practice. And so I suppose that's true, but I think one thing that I really, I guess, can't speak to my part in that. I don't know. I'm a little, um,
Yeah.
I don't know, but
You never know until time passes.
until time
Yeah.
passes. But I will
Yeah.
say that I think one thing I've noticed from people, a lot of people I've had people reach out to me. I used to, well, sort of still do, but I've written articles before I ever wrote a book. I wrote articles online, and would have people reach out to me. And so through conversations I've had with other people who work with Anubis, there are commonalities that I think have never really been spoken to historically, probably because we don't have a lot of books like this out there in the world.
Hmm.
But just a commonality, and I find this absolutely fascinating that you can have different people that have similar experiences um, with the same deity, and people generally find him to be more, I guess, more approachable than you might expect.
Hmm.
Um, and that isn't to say that you don't want to approach a deity with a high amount of respect, but I mean that to say that he isn't quite as this scary, terrifying figure as people might expect him to be. And again, everybody's experience is different. That comes with this little asterisk next to what I say, that everybody's experience is different. And so
Right.
your experience with Anubis may not be what I'm describing, but um, yeah, I have definitely heard that from a number of people.
Do you hmm, have you found that Anubis is talked about a lot in modern witch circles? Like, I say modern witch circles, that's a real thing. Um, I just mean like social networks and things
Yeah,
like that. Is Anubis something, a being that is commonly coming up in conversations or increasing as such? Because I know like Hecate is always common.
yeah,
Are we seeing and has climbed the ranks of that, I think, very quickly over my
yeah,
lifetime.
absolutely.
Um, is Anubis heading in that same path, do you think?
I like to think that Anubis is sort of the figure that is always present but kind of sits in the corner. I think that he has always had a role that people maybe don't talk about for one reason or another, or that maybe hasn't been noticed. So I definitely think that um, he has always been a prominent figure. It's funny because I hear a lot of people that talk about their experience with him, but then again, like we've said, there's not a lot out there on him. There are a few books, and I will say there are a lot of great books that kind of talk about the Egyptian gods at large,
Right.
with parts of them about Anubis, but it's not common to find something that's just about Anubis. So um, I guess there's kind of multiple parts to that. Like I said, part of it
Yeah.
being that he's sort of this not side figure, but sort of this shadowy figure that sits in the quiet space in the corner. But also that I do think that he has been sort of growing in popular. I think that there are people seeking. Um, I guess there are a lot of people that are going down this path a lot more than there ever has been in the past. So I think that any of the gods, I say that kind of at large, any of the gods
Hmm.
I think have more of a prominence than they ever have in history.
Gotcha. And if people think their house is haunted, do you think Anubis is the right one to call on?
Hey, you know what? He is the god of protection, so I would definitely say that's a possibility. And there's nothing like having as I'm saying this sort of tongue in cheek, but there's nothing like having a guard dog to watch over your house.
Right. um so if somebody wants to get started into some sort of relationship, I guess, with Anubis, but they've never done this before, what would be your advice?
My advice is always with I guess, for me, this is kind of how I started things. So I'm not someone who follows necessarily one specific path. There are paths that kind of not mandate, but sort of have guidelines of how to do things a certain way.
It's
I
like
I I,
pirates.
I break all of those rules and kind of do my own thing.
That's right.
But I kind of, when I'm approaching a deity for the first time, kind of do so. Um, I guess, and it depends on who it is, in a sort of informal way. I can tell you from my experience, again with a little asterisk that this is my experience, that Anubis is fine with informality. Just having sort of this open, um, I'll say conversation, an open conversation, talking directly to him, whether you call that prayer or whatever you want to say. But I don't always have something kind of written down that I want to say.
Hmm.
I think that with Anubis, intention and meaning is far more important than how you do it. So that's kind of the first thing I'll say. Um, Always, when you're working with a deity, do so with a high amount of respect. So don't start making any kind of demands of a deity. Certainly don't with Anubis, because even though I said he can, or I don't know if I said this, but I'll say it, tends to be, at least from my experience, more of a kinder, gentler deity than maybe other death deities can be. That doesn't mean that he's to be messed with. So um,
You don't poke the death deities. I
don't
just
poke the
don't.
don't poke the dog.
You can put that on a t-shirt, folks. It's fine.
Don't poke the death deities. At some point, they
Yeah.
will bite.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
then I was going to say, so do whatever reading you have access to find out more information about Anubis can be helpful, even if it's just reading historical information. I mean, it'd be great to pick up my book. I have a book about that, but
Yeah.
uh,
Hey, we know a
but
guy. Yeah.
but even if all you have is access to historical information, there's a lot that you can glean from that. Just finding out who Anubis is, because I think if you're going to be talking to someone or approaching any kind of deity, you kind of need to know, at least to some degree, who they are. And you'll learn more through your own experiences. But yeah.
All right, I'll let you off the hook there. So much pressure. um, I mean, I don't want to make the whole show about Anubis because you have a lot more to you as a person than that.
Sure.
It's clear that you have a deep devotion to Anubis, and you've written a great resource for people. So I do highly recommend that. Um, all right, we're back after an error. So to make sure we got everything, Charlie, how did you know when you were a witch? Like, how did you know that's who you were or what you were going to be?
That's a great question. I don't think I started using the term witch until I was in my 20s. I can't even give you a really good reason for it, but it wasn't a term that I was comfortable using. Um, in sort of the early days in my journey, I would call myself a pagan, and with the asterisk and understanding that it's a very broad term that doesn't really describe a lot in detail. It's a very broad term, can involve a lot of different spiritual paths. But um, I think most of the materials that I read in my early days were mostly Wiccan. So I was kind of largely influenced by that. I think I grew up in a Christian
Mm.
home, and I
Are you
but
okay? No.
well, no, but not because of that. Uh, um, no, it's kind of I had a very unique upbringing. I was raised by my grandparents, and um, it wasn't until I was much older when my grandmother retired that we actually started going to church. So I say Christian with sort of quotation marks because we never really
Gotcha.
practiced it. And my grandfather, even though he was a self-proclaimed Christian, had beliefs that were sort of non not typically
Yeah.
Christian. Believed in I mean, he believed in reincarnation and spirits and divination practices and even sort of energy healing, that kind of thing. Not typical of most Christians. And so I kind of had an early exposure to that. And I think I was in, oh, I don't know how old I was. How old was I? I was in 2000, no, 99, 99 or
Uh,
2001. It was one of those 2 years, 1999 or 2001. There was a movie adaptation that came out about the book, Mists of Avalon.
ah,
And which is a controversial book, but
yeah.
that's
That's a
another story for
whole
another
can of
story for
big
another day.
worms. Yeah.
That's a separate conversation. But at the time, I didn't know any of that, and I found the movie to be really interesting. And so I'm like, all right, there's a book. I'm gonna go read it. And so I read the book. Um, and at the end, there was some kind of uh, blurb about you know earth-based spirituality. And so I started looking into that, and then it all went downhill from there, or uphill, depends
It
on.
went on.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got started in this path. And I guess my development into calling myself a witch has come probably alongside with a lot of challenges I've had to overcome in
Hmm.
my life. I probably when it started becoming a term that I've been comfortable using.
Okay. Did you find the time you were, especially in the earliest times, developing yourself into a witch, into witchcraft, into a practice? Was I mean, I don't want you get any details you don't want to. Um, just the way you said that makes me think was was this almost therapeutic for you in a way, overcoming some challenges in
Oh,
life?
absolutely. I can tell you without any details, there's been a lot of challenges in my life and things from abuse to health concerns, financial problems. I've had a myriad of things that have happened in my life and that I've had to go through. And I think that that's definitely been uh, part of the journey. I think witchcraft has been a tool, almost like you said, therapeutic in a way, that has really helped me to get through a lot of these things. I think that had I not had something to rely on that's bigger than myself, I think I probably wouldn't be the same person that I am today.
That's really
So,
cool. I tell people all the time, like, uh, when they ask me how you get through like a PTSD issues and anxiety issues you've had, I'm like, I learned all this shit in the occult books, how to get through it. I
yeah,
can't afford
yeah.
therapy, but I can buy the $20 paperback about chaos magic. You know?
There's a time and a space for all of that,
Yeah.
I think.
um, you in your bio, there's a mention of doing shadow work, and this is a thing that I think is largely misunderstood by a lot of people when they hear it. So, what to you is shadow work? What do you mean when you're talking about that?
Yeah, it's something that's thrown around a lot these days, whether or not people. I think some people that talk about it maybe not don't even fully understand it, but uh, everybody, and we were just talking about adverse experiences in
Mm-hmm.
life, and everybody goes through shit.
No,
Excuse my
that's fine.
language. But everybody goes through stuff in their life, whether that be, you know, trauma of from your childhood or abuse or any other myriad of things that have lasting impacts on you. And if you've been through any of these experiences, you know that it's not a one and done deal. It comes up again and again and again and has lasting impacts on your health and your mental health. And um, to me, I shadow work is the kind of work that you do to address that, and it can be so many different things. Whether you want to approach it from a sort of a spiritual practice of using witchcraft as a tool for improving your life and yourself, or honestly, I'm just going to say I think it can even be doing the work of seeing a therapist if that's what works for you, if that's what you need. I think that can be its own thing that falls under that category. So I see it as being something that you're doing to improve your life, your circumstances, and heal yourself. Because I think ultimately we go through life, and I think it's really important we're all working to improve ourselves to be there better for ourselves and for other people. And so,
Well,
yeah,
if somebody knows, for instance, they they have something that's causing them grief, right? Um,
yeah,
that can develop into something that shades every part of their life. You know, disturbs
absolutely.
relationships, work, sleep, eating, everything. Um, and then it turns into heavier drinking or drugs or some sort of substance abuse. Now we're
Hmm.
getting into the elements and the areas by which people go, I need to fix this. And shadow work is the thing, the sign that flashes in a lot of witchy
Yeah,
circles.
uh,
Um,
yeah,
but I still don't think, if let's say I'm in that position and I know I'm supposed to do shadow work now, but what do I do to start? Like, what's the first thing I'm supposed to do? Right? That's the question people will have.
that's a great question that I is going to be very different for every person, I think, because what someone needs, I think, is going to depend on their situation. But I think it's it requires someone to be able to face the things that they may not want to. You're going to have to face memories, feelings, emotions that you may not want to. So the willingness to do that is, I think, one of the first keys. And honestly, sometimes the willingness to admit that you maybe need
Mm,
help. If the way that you're approaching things in life is not working, sometimes you need external help, whether that be, you know, having a spirit or a deity on your side, or whether that be seeking, help from a friend, from a therapist. Sometimes that's what it takes. So I think it requires you being open to being
mm-hmm.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're right. It does. I mean, that is the first step. You've got to admit you need help. Um,
Yeah.
and anyone out there listening who does feel like if you do feel like you're in that position, then please do reach out and talk to someone.
Absolutely.
You are not alone. You may feel like you're alone. You're not. Please reach out to somebody and talk.
Absolutely.
Now for a little less depressing subject. Covens. This by far is probably the most common thing I see asked. I was a steward and high steward for the Troth for years, helping people connect other heathens and stuff like that. It's so common. Is how do I find someone else near me in physical space to do the thing? Like how do you recommend people wrangle up another witch for themselves or a collection of them to form a group? Like that's challenge number one.
Weirdly enough, in today's day and age, I have met far more people online and social media than I have in person. I would say that, like, which is, I, I guess, can be one of the benefits of modern technology and social media and things. But I have met some really incredible witches, pagans, like-minded people out there through social media and getting to know people that way. And I, I think it can be a great tool. And you really never know who you're going to meet. And hey, I live nearby. In fact, there. I learned Jason Mankey lives like less than 20 minutes from me, just as an example. But
Oh, okay.
um,
Yeah, are you guys hanging out?
no,
No.
actually, we've only met in
Oh,
person once.
Jason,
Oddly enough.
oddly enough, is
Um,
the existing current episode before I release this interview. Yeah.
I saw that. I saw that. Yeah. Um, but anyway, yeah, you never know who you're going to meet online. You never know where you might meet someone that, even if they live far away, you need to
Hmm.
connect with. I think, to me, that's more important. In fact, I've connected with people that I've had far deeper connections with, um, who live across the country than people I know
Hmm.
locally. So I guess that's kind of my. I hate to say that's the place to start, but it can be if you don't know where else to start. If you don't have access to, I don't know. I mean, if you live in a small community, there may not be a lot of people
Hmm.
around who you have the ability to connect with. But even if that's not your thing, I think social media, other online platforms can be ways to find people who meet in person. Because, I mean, I live in California, and there's quite a number of groups that meet up in person, and so I think that can be a tool to find people
Yeah,
too.
if you're in a more populated area, it gets a lot easier, I'm sure, to find
Yeah.
people, find the others, as it were. Um, I usually tell people, like search on social media for your town, your county, your state, your area of your state, pagans, witches, heathens,
Mhm.
whatever you're into. Um,
Yeah.
if there's a coffee place not named Starbucks or Dunkin', like they probably have a bulletin board or something in there. Go like see what's up there, put something intriguing there, say there's a meetup if you want to be that public.
Yeah.
Metaphysical bookstores, if you're lucky enough to have one nearby, I mean, support them if you can, and tell the owner that you're looking for others. They usually know what groups are around in your area, or someone just like you looking for someone else. Yeah, and the
Exactly.
most important thing, do not ever meet someone the first time anywhere other than a public place.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. If someone you've never met before says, "Hey, come hang out in my basement," I would say no. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah, don't do
Absolutely not.
that. um all right. Let's see, 30, 40. Where are we at on time? We're about where I like to be. Um, every place out there has a history, right? It's got its own spooky house and folklore, and like every place has all those things to it, right? Somewhere you have lived. I mean, you said you're a transplant from the Midwest to California, so let's go with somewhere you've lived.
Yeah.
Is some local folklore. If people were going to go visit this area nearby or actually in that town, what do you tell them? What story would you tell them, or what would they have to see?
One of my favorite places that I used to like to visit when I was living in the Midwest was this old. It used to be, well, of all places in Indiana, there was a hot spring hotel there called Mudlavia,
That's just fun to
and
say.
it was. I know it's kind of fun to say Mudlavia, but it was this hotel that was kind of halfway between. Uh, my mind almost drew a blank there. Halfway between Indianapolis and Chicago,
Okay.
and it was sort of this halfway house for these gangs that would go back and forth traveling between. And I don't know the whole entire history of what happened, but it eventually burned down and is really, really spooky. I that's all. I don't know what happened there. I know that it's got this really big history of being popular with gangs. I don't know if people were murdered there. I don't know, but anytime I went, it gave me the heebie-jeebies until I went home. Um, I think it's closed off to the public now. It used to be you could kind of park nearby and sneak in, but I think they've completely made it so you can't even do that now. But it was one of my favorite places to visit if I wanted a
So
dose of
this in
that.
an abandoned like it's abandoned, closed up old
Oh,
hotel.
it,
Oh,
it burned down. Yeah,
burnt
it
down.
burned
So
down.
there's no
Yeah.
standing buildings or anything anymore.
Well, it was. You have the structure of the building that still
Ah.
exists. I don't know if it was stone or what, but anyway, you've got the structure of the building. You can actually go inside there. The windows have disappeared. The roof and everything is burned down, but so it's just the shell of the building. But you can go inside. You can walk around. You can go in some of the rooms. You can walk around the property. It's been so overgrown that it's kind of the whole this like in the middle of the forest essentially.
That makes for a cool spot. Yeah. It's not
Yeah,
currently
yeah.
popular with gangs. You're not sending people to go get fucking beat up or shot, are you?
I hope we aren't.
Disclaimer: any violence that happens upon you is not Charlie's fault.
No, it is not.
Take friend and flashlights.
I'm a very
Yeah.
non-violent person.
Well, I tell people all the time, like the scariest thing you'll ever encounter if you're going out doing paranormal investigation or anything are like really old floorboards, spiders you didn't see, and meth labs. Like
I mean, you probably have all of those in Indiana.
yeah.
So
You have them all here in Illinois. All
yeah.
right. Well, I think this is a good place to sort of start wrapping things up. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get to? Any parting thoughts you wanted to share?
I don't believe so, but I did want to just say that I really appreciate you having me on here. It was great to have the chance to talk to you today.
Absolutely. It was great having you on. I appreciate you coming back coming back. Shit. First time you've been here. I've had so many regular guests, I think recently, that I'm programmed to say it's great to have you back again.
Have you back.
No, it is great. Anytime you want to come back, you're more than welcome. It was really cool to talk
Thank
to
you.
you. Where can people find you and your book?
Yes, you can find me on most social media platforms. I've tried to keep my username consistent. Charlar_author. I think I'm on Instagram, X, Threads, Blue Sky. I think that's a new
That's a
one. I
new one.
recently joined Facebook. Facebook. You can also find me on my website and more information about me, things I've written other than my book, and also links to purchase my book on my website, anubislightshadow.com. And yeah, my book is sold through Wiser Books or through any major bookseller, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. I've even seen it on Walmart.com of
Wow.
all places. So yeah,
We are in a unique time for sure. And if you guys want that, if you have a local metaphysical kind of place, I'm sure those store owners can get the book for you. If you could just be a little patient, please help those folks out.
Yeah, support your local business. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. If they don't have it, you can ask. I'm sure they can get it.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here. It's really great talking to you. Thank you to everyone listening. As always, if you like the episode, please go rate it, share it, and spread it out there on all your favorite networks and let people know to come check out the show. If you want to hear the rest of this interview, you're going to have to go to Patreon. That is patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or you can go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. Okay, stay weird out there, my friends. And now it's bonus audio time. Charlie Larson, are you ready?
I am ready.
They always say they're ready.
Let's hope I am.
All right. First question is always the same. What famous person's resting place do you most want to visit, and why?
Ooh. That's a great question that I've not really ever thought about. Do
you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions and magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.